Are the toxic five preventing you from resolving your chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID? Hey there, I'm Evan Hirsch, the Energy MD, and recently I was on the Eleanor Stein podcast and I talked all about the toxic five, why I don't test anymore, and how you can remove them from your body so that you can resolve your chronic fatigue syndrome or long COVID. So go ahead and check it out, and I'll see you over there.
Welcome to the Dr. Eleanor Stein podcast. On this episode, we're going to learn about a proven method to improve energy from a medical doctor with years of experience. Evan Hirsch, also known as the Energy MD, specializes in helping people with long COVID and ME/CFS resolve their symptoms so that they can get back to living their best lives. After recovering from his own 5-year battle with ME, Dr. Hirsch created a 4-step process that addresses important root causes of fatigue. He discusses his method in his book, Fix Your Fatigue, and on his podcast, the Energy MD podcast. And better yet, he works virtually, so he can help you no matter where you live. When he is not supporting clients, you can find Dr. Hirsch, I love this, singing musicals, dancing hip-hop, learning languages, and traveling with his family. Evan, Dr. Hirsch, welcome to the podcast.
Eleanor, thanks so much for having me on.
You're welcome. So I often ask people, on this podcast, whether people are researchers or clinicians or people with lived experience, most people have some personal connection to these chronic fatigue and chronic pain disorders, and I gather that's your story. Can you kind of share what happened to you and how it got you interested in this field?
Absolutely. So my first experience was actually with my older sister. I was still in high school. She was in college. She graduated university and then came home. She tried to work a job and then unfortunately she couldn't. And she was later diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I don't remember much about that time, but I do remember um, the challenges that she had. And my mom was kind of dragging her to every doctor. Then later on, when I started my residency program in 2004, I met my wife, we fell in love, and 3 months later, she couldn't get out of bed for the better part of 3 years. And so at that point, I was doing my residency in family medicine at University of Washington here in Olympia, Washington. And I asked my attendings and specialists all about chronic fatigue and trying to get her help. And there just really wasn't much in the conventional literature. And so I got more interested in holistic medicine and integrative and functional medicine. I did my first training in functional medicine when I graduated residency. I started my own practice. And then unfortunately, a number of years later, in 2010, I got chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS. And so it lasted for 5 years, just about destroyed my career, my relationship with my wife. She's not 100%. We've got a young child. And she's like, can you do the dishes? And all we could do was like lie on the couch. I could try to work my job, but I had to keep hiring people to do the job that I was supposed to do because I couldn't function right.
Right.
And then finally, after napping under my desk what felt like the 1,000th day in a row, I realized that I just had to find all of the causes that I had. It wasn't going to be one cause, it was going to be multiple causes, and I just had to go on a journey to do that. So I just read excessively and went to conferences and did a bunch of my own research and I found what I now call the toxic five that we're going to talk about today. But I found over 30 plus different causes. I realized if I addressed all those in myself that I would potentially get better. And that's exactly what happened. With every cause that I addressed, I got a little bit better until I got the great energy that I have today. So I wrote a book about it, and then it became my life's work to help 1 million people resolve their chronic fatigue syndrome. And then we were uniquely positioned to help people with long COVID because it's essentially, chronic fatigue syndrome with a different trigger.
So I just want to make sure I heard this right. You said you're going to talk about the 5, we'll call them the big causes, but you're saying there's actually more like 30.
Yes, there's 30 plus in different causes when we're looking at a combination of deficiencies and toxicities. So
Mhm.
that's how I categorize them. So deficiencies are things that are not in the body that are supposed to be there. So hormones like adrenals and thyroid and sex hormones,
Yeah.
mitochondrial function, which is supposed to make 70 to 90% of our energy, vitamins, minerals, lifestyle habits, mindset. So I consider all those deficiencies. And
Okay.
then there's the toxicities and infections.
Wow. So let's dive into what you're calling the five energy drainers and maybe just outline. So these are kind of the most common five uh, root causes that need to be addressed. Am I getting that right?
So I call them the real root causes because, people who are
Okay.
listening to this and all the people who come to see me, they spent a lot of time on a number of these 30 causes, or 30 plus causes, generally on the deficiencies. So they've worked on replacing their hormones and their vitamins and their minerals, right? And they've done their lifestyle habits and they're still not better. And what I find is the reason why they have those deficiencies, or 80% of those deficiencies, is because they have what I call the toxic five. So this is a combination
Okay.
of heavy metals,
Uh huh.
chemicals, molds, infections, and nervous system dysfunction that builds up in the body over time. And consequently, it damages the mitochondria, causes deficiencies in the hormones, causes deficiencies in vitamins and minerals, basically affects everything except for your lifestyle habits. But that's what I found to be the real root cause, and the hill that I'm gonna die on is that, for people who address those toxic 5, they always get better. It's just a question of how long it takes.
So let's start with heavy metals and just kind of go through each one and what they are, where you would find them, how you would know if you have them. I know we're going to talk about testing a little bit later, and what you can do about them. And I guess in between there, how they impact the body, like why they're so problematic.
Sure. So if we're starting off with the heavy metals, we're talking about mercury, which is unfortunately found in pretty much everything that comes out of the ocean these days, except for the really tiny fish like sardines and anchovies. And they come from the mercury vapor produced by coal plants that settles over the oceans. So this is one way that we accumulate mercury in our bodies. I've heard of people going on a swordfish diet or, tuna diet, and consequently they're full of mercury. They get brain fog, chronic fatigue, all that. Also, every single time you bite down on those silver fillings that you have in your mouth, those produce mercury vapor. They're called silver because, dentists don't wanna call them mercury fillings, but they're half silver, they're half mercury, and they are toxic. So, that's another way that we get mercury. There's cadmium that we get from firsthand and secondhand smoke. There's lead, which you can get from lead pipes, you can get from um, lead paint. Most of the time in our houses, we didn't remove lead paint before we painted over, right? So in the dust in our homes, oftentimes there's a lot of lead paint. Lead gasoline, which is really no longer used, can still be in our parents and our grandparents. And so it's really important to note that, one of um, the major detoxification events for a woman is detoxifying into her child in the womb, right? And so, unfortunately, this is one of the ways that we get a lot of toxins and infections before we even come out of the womb. There's been studies to show that there's over 300 different chemicals found in babies' cord blood. That study was done about a decade ago, so it's probably even worse nowadays. So, it's just an example of how we get started already behind the 8 ball, and then we accumulate these toxins kind of along that path. So, that's just some examples of some heavy metals. Heavy metals will damage the mitochondria, which produces 70 to 90% of our energy. It's found in every cell in the body except for red blood cells. It decreases, the stress of having the heavy metals in our body will cause deficiencies in hormones, vitamins, and minerals. Um, and they're also kind of synergistic with some of these other causes that we're going to be talking about today. They hijack the immune system. So there's a lot of people out there who have long COVID, persistent symptoms of COVID, or have chronic fatigue syndrome, and they have infections, and they can't get rid of those infections because they have heavy metals, chemicals, and molds in the body that are inhibiting the immune system's ability to help you get rid of those infections with whatever antimicrobials you're potentially using. So that's heavy metals. And then with chemicals, we're talking about plastics and PFAs, and I mean, there's too many to name, but they all kind of have similar consequences. Oftentimes they're mimicking certain hormones, causing hormone disruption. They're damaging the mitochondria. They're causing stress in the system, which ends up decreasing our hormones. Um, and they operate synergistically once again with the other toxins that are present. The more toxins you have in the body, the more it decreases your ability to detoxify. So it's kind of this awful catch 2022 where you can't get these toxins and infections out of your body because they're accumulating and they're quote unquote clogging up these drainage or these exit pathways, which are your normal ability to be able to get rid of these toxins out of the body, out of the kidneys and the liver and the lymph and the neural lymph and the brain and the gallbladder and the intestines. Those pathways can get clogged. So that's heavy metal.
I'm kind of listening, thinking this is like a train wreck because it's not just the direct effects of each category of toxins, but it's the impact they have on your ability to get rid of them, for the immune system to work properly, for the detox pathways to work properly.
Exactly. Oftentimes there's a trigger that, people know. They're like, I was fine until moved into this house and they had mold or got certain infection or whatever. But the reality is like you said, it's a total body burden. You didn't get there just in that one moment. The stage was set. And this is what I try to convince people or talk to people a lot about with long COVID is that it's not just about the spike protein, because a lot of people will spend a lot of time trying to get rid of spike protein and taking care of COVID itself. But the stage was set by all of these other causes. And this is also the reason why we don't test anymore and why we just treat. I've been fooled by tests before in the past, these urine tests, which generally are pretty good, but they're really more tests of excretion. They're telling you how well your body excretes. They don't tell you what your total body burden is of a particular thing, like heavy metals or chemicals. And so when people come to see me, they've tried a lot of things, and I want to make sure that when our time is done together, that they're better. And so I know that by addressing all of the toxic five, the heavy metals, the chemicals, the molds, the infections, and the nervous system dysfunction, if we address all of those things, that's like 99% of all the potential causes, probably something else out there too that we don't understand yet. But if we're addressing 99%, they're a lot more likely to get better. So,
One thing I
go ahead.
did, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, after you, please.
I was just going to say with the heavy metals, and I'll maybe ask you this for each of the 5 categories, what can people do to lessen their exposure? So obviously they can't change their parents, they're already born. They can't change too much about the air. It's out there and people are burning coal. I live in Alberta where, it's a big issue. So are there things people can do for each of these 5 to lower their exposure, starting with the heavy metals?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would say that, when we talk about like genetics versus environment, genetics is about 10 to 20%, environment is 80 to 90%. So there's always things that people can do. So it's really looking at your air, your water, your food, and looking to see, okay, what potential toxicities are coming from here and how can I clean it? In the States, we have this website through the Environmental Working Group that looks at tap water. And it is amazing. Everybody thinks that, oh, my municipality is going to be taking care and cleaning my tap water. And they all have these water purification systems, to treat the water. But unfortunately, when you look at the toxicity that's present in our tap water, it's amazingly toxic, unfortunately.
And so the Environmental Working Group shows it by zip code or something like that? So
It does.
what your water quality is?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it's ewg.org/tap water.
Okay.
Uh,
And so then you could know whether your tap water would suggest to invest in like your own water filter system.
Correct, and the reality is that it's less about whether or not it's there, and it's more about how toxic it is. I mean, it's really just to convince people to get a better water filter, right?
Okay.
And you can, for $150 now or $200, you can get a good one. I like Aquasana's products. They do a nice job. I've got their whole house water filter. There's nothing like taking a bath or a shower when your water is clean. We've had guests before who have MCAS, mast cell activation, right? They're really sensitive, and they can really tell a difference when they're using our shower or our bath.
Yeah. I'm the same. I've had a whole house filter for 25 years and I love it. And now, I'm traveling and it's not the same. It's not the same. So, what about with chemicals? Same thing. I mean, what you just said, try to filter your air, your water, eat real food, eat organic.
Yeah, let's talk about some of that. Yeah, so there's the water, and then in terms of the food, the more organic that you can consume, the better. I know it's expensive, and I don't like to recommend Walmart, but Walmart has pretty cheap organic food, or at least less expensive. So, something like that, or become friendly with your farmer and buy it, directly farm to table sort of thing. So yeah, that's one way. Another way is making sure that you're washing your fruits and your vegetables when they're coming into your home, because even if they are organic, there's always blowover. The wind blows, there could be a non-organic farm next to an organic farm, right? And then you buy your stuff from that organic farm. So
Okay.
that's important.
Oh, do you know of any research, like how much of a difference? I have to admit, being lazy when it comes to the washing. So, this is a personal question. Does washing really make a difference?
It's a great question. I don't think that the research is really clear on it.
Okay.
It's also something that I'm lazy on as well. We used to have a spray, like a vinegar spray that we would do, and I don't know what happened to that spray. So, we get our stuff delivered from a farm, and then we wash it. But yeah, using some form of washing is going to be supportive.
Okay. And if we move on, I think your next category in the big five was infection.
We were going to go into molds,
Oh,
which
boy.
actually dovetails nicely into air quality.
Okay.
So I do like air filters. Air Doctor is my favorite, and that's because they've got the best pricing for a filter that gets down to 0.003 microns, and so that it gets mycotoxins as well as mold toxins. Um, I've got a website, energymdmethod.com/recommended, and it has all of these products on there that I'm talking about. And there's some affiliate links on there too if people want to get a discount and kind of support the work that we do.
Okay.
So in terms of mold, unfortunately, it's really ubiquitous. There's studies to show that over 50 to 60% of all buildings in the world have water damage, and most of those have mold, right? So and any sort of water damage that could have happened in the history of the home. So people who say, well, I don't see any mold in my home, but it's a 1920s home. It's like, has there ever been a busted pipe, a roof leak, a flood in the basement? So it's really important to get things assessed. I do recommend doing a combination mold spore and mycotoxin dust test to determine whether or not there's mold in a space. It's a good initial test, and then we'll recommend mold inspectors after that to determine if there's mold in the space. But, there's two times when I really have a hard time getting people all the way better. One is if they're living in mold,
Yeah.
and the other one is if they have infections in their jaw. They've got cavitations that haven't been remedied. And so those are like the two main tests that we recommend in the program that actually are required in the program. Doing
Okay.
a mold dust test that I recommended, and then having a
Is that like the Hermie?
I like the Emma test.
Emma.
It's by Real Time Labs. It's very similar. It does mold spores and mycotoxins. The ERMI test or the Hertzme test just do mycotoxins.
Yep. Okay.
So I like them. I like the combination because sometimes you'll pick up one and not the other, and a mold inspector will find something. So
Uh,
it's a big ball of wax, it's something, it can feel overwhelming to folks, but you just have to go step by step. We have a lot of support, a health coach to meet with you to, help you all along the way, find the right people to support you. But it's all about, getting you better. And this is a major cause that has to be addressed.
I couldn't agree more. When I look back in my medical practice, people living in mold, I would just say, just don't get better. Like there's just too much of a constant assault on the immune system. Never mind the toxins, right? And the impact of those on the body. And the problem with mold is it's usually so expensive to kind of professionally remediate and a lot of the people we deal with are financially challenged because they've been ill for so long. So the word overwhelming has definitely come up many times.
So
And
there are
what you recommend there where like someone knows that maybe they even know and admit they have mold, but they don't have, $20,000 to remediate.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the first thing is just to try to stay objective as possible when thinking about mold and getting your home assessed, just so you can determine, okay, is this a problem for me?
Right.
So you can have that knowledge, and then it's having the air filters in the space, which will run, $300 $400. You can have multiple air filters, and then fogging. And so those can be really supportive, if you can't get out of a space, if you're
And
waiting.
what do you fog with?
So I like, let's see, Microbial Health Balance, I think is the name of the company. So the EC3 products, that's also on that recommended website that I mentioned. You can get the fogging machine, and then you can get the natural cleaner that comes with it, and it'll make it for, I don't know, 100 hours or something like that. But that can be incredibly helpful because those droplets will bind to the mycotoxins. They'll fall to the ground. You can vacuum them up. You can remove carpets out of your home. So there's a lot of modifications that you can do,
Okay.
that can decrease your exposure and allow you to kind of get better sooner rather than later.
Great. Would infection be next?
Infection is next.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, whether it's a virus, a bacteria, Lyme disease, so a spirochete, Lyme co-infections, parasite, spike protein, like all of these different causes can be a trigger and can end up causing, chronic infections. All of these infections will try to use the mitochondrial machinery in order to replicate itself. So the mitochondria will shut itself down, the cell danger response, so that it's not harming you, but it consequently then you're not making any energy. The stress of the infections will decrease the hormones, and it really requires this multi-pronged approach. The infections will bind to the heavy metals, chemicals, and molds. And so consequently, when you pull one of those out, like let's say you're pulling molds out, it can release the infections as well. So this is another reason why the test can be erroneous, because they're not going to pick that up whenever you take the test, and why we find it so important to make sure that we're addressing all of these causes as we're going through, so that when we're pulling out the heavy metals and the chemicals and the molds, oh, I forgot to mention yeasts really bind to heavy metals.
Yeah.
When those are getting pulled out, the rest of these are being released. I call it like a toxic matrix, where it's not just die off oftentimes or a Herxheimer reaction, when you're pulling these toxins and infections out of the body, oftentimes other things are being released that were bound up that also need to be addressed. And so I call that a whack-a-mole effect, where one infection oftentimes will pop out as you're removing some of these toxins and other infections.
Now, if you're not testing so much, how do you figure out which infections you have and does it matter?
It doesn't, because we address them all.
Oh,
So I find that it costs less, takes less time. It's just adding in a couple more tinctures that are going to provide that broad spectrum anyway, because how accurate is that testing for infections? There's some PCR testing in urine. I mean, there's PCR testing in blood as well, but you're looking for DNA of the infection in urine. Well, guess what? If it's in the muscles like Bartonella, it's not going to show up in the urine, right? Or if it's in the joints. right? And then if you're looking at a serology test, looking at the immune system reaction to an infection, that counts on having an intact and functional immune system. So if the immune system is not functional, you're not going to get a reaction to a particular infection. You're not going to be able to see whether the infection is there. And if you don't diagnose it, and this is the model that you're working in, you're not going to treat it, right?
Right.
And so I just think that we're really compromised by the quality of our tests and the costs of our tests and all that and how these bugs and these infections and these toxins can skirt the immune system, that it just makes a lot more sense to, and we're saving so much time, not just money in terms of, some doctors want people to spend $5,000, $10,000 on laboratory tests over the course of a year, right? So that's the significant money component. But in terms of time, we're not getting a lab test, waiting for it to come back for about a month, then starting a particular treatment for that particular test, repeating the test and seeing if something's there. It just takes up so much more time. It makes a lot more sense to just move through a process where I'm getting people up to a significant dose that's going to address all of the toxins, all the infections that are present.
Wow, that's really interesting. The last of the toxic five you have is nervous system
Just
dysregulation. Yeah.
Yeah, or trauma. And so, as humans, we all have nervous system dysfunction. So, this can be really significant abuse, otherwise known as trauma, or it can be with trauma with a big T, some people call it, or you can have trauma with a little t, which is more along the lines like I had, where I was raised by imperfect parents. I had two siblings who are also imperfect, and we're all trying to get our needs met. And then I was peers with other imperfect humans. And then I went to medical school and university and had relationships with other imperfect humans, right? We get all this trauma, and it changes the way that we see the world, and consequently it creates more stress. I push, part of my story and the chronic fatigue that I had was being a perfectionist, pushing through, and it's still something that I work on, but I'm so much better at it from the nervous system retraining and the meditation and the mindfulness that I've been doing the last several years.
Maybe this is slightly off topic, but I'm curious as to your opinion because you've obviously worked with probably thousands of people now. So a lot of people wonder whether personality is a risk factor and whether being a so-called type A personality is a risk factor for developing chronic fatigue syndromes. I'm wondering what you think about that.
I think it's true, but I also wonder, there's very few people who aren't type A personalities. Like there's really extreme, high achieving perfectionism type A, but there's also like staying on top of your bills and going to your job every day. Like society has, I've joked in the past that I'm a type B person living a type A lifestyle, and you can't really be type B unless you have like a really chill job, you're living off the grid, like society just doesn't really allow you. There's too many responsibilities.
Yeah, that's really a good point. So we're forced into it even if it's not our natural way of being.
Exactly.
Okay. So what would be some of the strategies you recommend for people for the nervous system component?
Yeah, so we have a nervous system retraining part of our program that I implemented about 6 months ago or so.
Mm.
And, it's a combination of what a lot of other people have done. So I basically just curated some of it, and we have somebody on staff who guides people through this process. But, it's a combination of top down and bottom up approaches. So top down is, for those who aren't familiar, is mindset. So we have a 4-step process, 3 gratitudes a day, visioning your ideal life and your ideal health, looking at any sort of limiting beliefs you have and flipping them into empowering beliefs or affirmations, and then asking yourself an empowering question. And so that's a daily practice that you can do. And so that's thinking that changes the nervous system and the body. And then there's changing the body bottom up that ends up changing the thinking and the nervous system. So this is breath work. 4-7 deep breath, or just taking deep breaths throughout the day. How that can really, change your state. It's humming and gargling, doing some polyvagal
Yeah.
nervous system retraining. It's gentle stretches. So there's a number of different components that can be really supportive. And I encourage people to, you can Google all those things. You can talk to AI and say, hey, give me some strategies for retraining my nervous system. And then just find the strategies that work for you, right? And then implement those, and it can really make a big difference. I find that it can be 90% of some people's issues, and for other people it can be 10%. But the thing is that it really works wonderfully well with when we're addressing the rest of the toxic five. That's why I hopped on board and said, okay, this is crazy important, and we need to include it.
So you would say if people aren't open to addressing the nervous system, there may be their chances of full recovery might be less.
Absolutely. In fact, we don't accept anybody into our program who's not willing to do that work.
Wow, interesting. Now you've developed a 4-step program. I'm wondering if you can walk us through some of the components of that.
Absolutely. So the first step, and the first step of success, is making sure that we're addressing all of the causes that an individual has. And so this is going to be determined, when people join our program, they fill out a form. I provide them with a plan based on the causes that I see. Now, we're always going to address the toxic five. We're always going to address adrenals and mitochondria, because you can't have fatigue without it. But then the question is, do you have a thyroid issue based on your symptoms and maybe some labs? Do you have vitamin D deficiency, B12? What are your lifestyle habits like? And so, the majority, 95% of all that I can determine based on somebody's symptoms and their history. So I don't require labs, but some people do come with B12, vitamin D, and thyroid, which has been done probably by even a conventional practitioner at this point in their journey. And so we can use that information. So it's determining what causes they have of those 33 that we need to, 30 plus, I should say. And that's step one. So then in step
And sorry, just to go back, so including because a lot of those 33 are deficiencies, so you're making your best guess about those by virtue of their symptoms.
correct.
If you have these symptoms, like you've got kind of an algorithm, and if they answer certain questions, you're like, we better check adrenal or something like that.
Well, I'm going to treat adrenal and mitochondrial anyway.
Oh, okay.
But in terms of something like iron would be helpful to have a lab.
Yep.
B12 would be helpful. Vitamin D would be helpful, though I still generally, even if I didn't have a lab, I'd still put somebody on vitamin D. And same thing with B12. Not so much the case with iron because of infections, and we can talk more about that later. But like, for example, thyroid. If they don't have a thyroid test, which would be malpractice at this point if they had fatigue and they didn't have thyroid test, right? But if they didn't, but they had low thyroid symptoms, then I would recommend doing what I call a thyroid subjective ramp up, which is basically I use a glandular thyroid supplement, and I increase by a capsule every 2 weeks until they get symptoms of too much thyroid, and then we back down a little bit to get their ideal dose, because everything just works better when the thyroid is optimized. And once again, the labs are imperfect. So it's just better to kind of get people to an optimal dose.
And you talk about natural, so I'm kind of tuning in here that you're not using drugs for each of these, you're using natural products.
Exactly. So even though I have my MD, I'm operating online, and I'm helping people across state lines and across the world because I operate as a health coach
Got it.
online. Yeah. And so everything, and I was able to do that when I realized that my tools, my natural tools, were in many ways better than the prescriptions that I was using. And so everything is supplements, lifestyle habits, herbs, tinctures, capsules. Stuff like that.
Cool. And so what's your approach to just to go through those 5, or sorry, I asked you about your 4 steps. I'm gonna stick with that and then come back if there's some gaps. Yeah.
So the second step, even though this process is all about the toxic five, In the second step, we replace the deficiencies.
Okay.
And this is because by optimizing what I call the big three, the adrenals, the thyroid, the mitochondria, and then the others as well, it makes the body more resilient. Makes it easier, increases your energy from maybe a 3 out of 10, if 10 is ideal, to a 4 out of 10. You have less crashes. And it allows you to deal then also with the die off and the stress of the die off that's going to happen in step 4.
Okay.
Because even though, people we want people to have die-off so we know something is happening, but we want them to have just an itty-bitty little die-off. We want them to go as gracefully through this process because having die-off, killing infections, pulling out toxins can be stressful on the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so it's
And so,
important to replace those deficiencies first.
and again, that's being done kind of on spec, like without tests. You're looking at symptoms, or you're giving everybody the same kind of replacements there.
There are some favorites and basically over the years, that's why I say, but the dosing is gonna be this different
Right.
based on their reaction to it, and so I may have a favorite, adrenal product, mitochondria, thyroid, they'll do that subjective ramp up, um,
Yeah.
vitamin D, B12, everybody's got a methylation issue, but we don't give methyl B12 because most of the people on our program can't tolerate it. So we're doing, hydroxy or adenylyl B12.
Okay.
We only do iron if there's a lab test that indicates that that's the case. Um, that's about it for the
Okay.
efficiencies. And then we go into step 3, which is opening up the exit pathways.
Mm.
So the liver, the kidney, the lymph, the neural lymph, the gallbladder, the intestines, all of the ways that we get toxins and infections out of our body, we want to start this process so that we can mitigate their die-off as much as possible. So we can make this process as graceful as possible. I would imagine people listening to this have had die-off, have had a Hertz-Stein reaction, and have spent a week to a month in bed, right? Because they felt like crap and they pushed them back. So we don't want that to happen, and that's the benefit of utilizing tinctures, where when we increase by a drop every day or every couple days, we can see what's happening, and we can either stop that ramp up, or we can increase your step 3 support, so if you start to feel worse, so that you don't have to end up in that place.
So, what are some examples of the support to encourage? Call it safe excretion of all the things you're trying to get rid of.
Yeah, so a couple of favorites are things like Smilax or sarsaparilla, parsley, asparagus, tincture,
Okay.
which is really great for supporting the transsulfuration, which is the pathway after methylation. Um, Milk thistle, Berber, panela. So there's a number of these that we'll use depending on the person's situation. And then we can always increase from there if they need some additional support, because everybody's an individual. And so people say, well, and then how do you know what to use? And it's a lot of times it's their reaction to treatment. It's like, I'm gonna give you this to start, and then we're gonna start ramping up on these. And as we, if we're using something to go after viruses, and you take 1 drop of that and you feel like you've just been hit by a bus, then we can go ahead and increase the step 3 support, double that dose or do a rescue dose, which can really help to mitigate those symptoms. And then we also know that, okay, viruses are a problem for you. Because even though these herbs do multiple, double and triple duty, which is wonderful, they also can be pretty specific for certain infections. So that
Right.
gives us an idea about which are most important, which is helpful intellectually, but not practically. People are like, I really want to know what my causes are. And I was like, does it really matter? We're going to
Yeah.
address all of them.
This is so novel. Some of my listeners know my story that I've done, hundreds of thousands of dollars of tests and then done the medical kind of grade treatment for all of those multiple things that I found, including all the toxic 5. And a lot of them didn't really help. But like you say, they were really expensive. And so to have what I'm hearing you're doing differently is it's really iterative, like you're probably texting or communicating with the coach really often, like, oh, felt better, felt worse, this happened, that happened, and then coming back really quickly, not waiting 2 or 3 weeks for the next appointment. I'm guessing. I'm kind of reading in.
Exactly, yeah, we guarantee a response to any question in 2 business days because of exactly what you're talking about, and so anytime anybody feels worse in the program or has a question, they ask it and I respond or my health coach responds, but I look at every single question and make sure that it's being responded to appropriately.
Wow, that's very impressive. So infection, you're using a lot of tinctures. What about for the mold? So mold, obviously, number one on the list is to get rid of it or head it out of there. But say, what about for the mold that's already in the body?
Yeah, so we'll use a combination of different binders plus N-acetylcysteine. So I used to use glutathione, but I don't anymore because it's quite potent
Mm,
and it's usually a little bit too much for people on my program. So the NAC is, part of the glutathione molecule, and it detoxifies very well. It has a number of other different functions. For those who haven't heard about it before, it's what is given to you in the emergency room if you come in liver toxicity, like you've taken too much Tylenol or something like that.
yeah,
So yeah, so it's a really great molecule to use, but that's kind of like a 1-2 combination. But the magic is also like as you go through this process, more mold is released out of the body and it has to be bound up in different ways by these different binders and pulled
yeah,
out at a rate that the body can tolerate. So that's a big part of this too, is that I want people to detoxify at a rate that they can tolerate. And for some people, that may be, they're 80% better at 12 months. And for some people, that's 24 months.
yeah.
But regardless, they've been sick for so long, they have to just understand that this is part of the process. I try to be as transparent with people as possible. Like, you're not going to be better in 3 months.
Right. And then the nervous system, you've kind of already talked about your approach to it. So you've kind of, like you say, curated what you've taken from other programs and created your own of what you think are the most powerful strategies.
Yeah, and we have a basic version of that, and we've got a more advanced. And then if people want to go even deeper into that, we'll refer them out to do Primal Trust or the Gupta program or one of those.
Okay. Let me think. You've just done such a great job of explaining everything. Maybe, can you give a case example? Like, what would be a typical person who would come work with you? What's wrong with them? How long have they been sick? And kind of what the process entails?
Yeah, so let's take this person who just graduated from our program. She's 60 years old. She had to retire early. She was a physical therapist. She had to retire early from practice because she had chronic fatigue syndrome. She had a number of car accidents and traumatic brain injuries, which unfortunately, that's a stressor. It's actually really interesting because oftentimes people will get symptoms after traumatic brain injuries and they think that it's due to it. And yes, the traumatic brain injury was the trigger, but oftentimes those symptoms of panic, anxiety, pain on the bottom of the feet, sweating all the time, that can be um, Lyme co-infections. It can be like Babesia or Bartonella that was released from the stress. That stress just really shakes the body, and then it causes the immune system to get confused, and then these infections kind of come out and become opportunistic. So she had seen a lot of practitioners, had worked with functional medicine providers, had replaced her deficiencies. So she was pretty keyed up on that. She had certain supplements that she liked, and we just kind of kept her on those. Then we did step 3. I mean, we did step 1 initially when she came in. Step 2 with those deficiencies she was on. Step 3, and I basically give people a Google sheet for what they're going to be doing for the next 6 months. And so then they walk through that. So they know exactly where they're supposed to be in the process. Like, introduce this, and then you follow the ramp up instructions, and then you wait 4 days, and then you introduce the next row. So
Wow.
they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing at all times. We also have a curriculum that kind of like walks them through and goes a little bit more into depth on things. But when you're done with a module, which are really short, you check it off And so, you know, if you've got bad brain fog, you know exactly where to come back to, exactly where you're at. So, we introduced the step 3 products for her, and she ramped up on those, didn't really have an issue. But then we got into step 4 and did some evaluation, determined that she was living in mold. She had somebody come
And
in.
sorry, what's step 4? Did we cover that?
Sorry,
What?
step 4 is removing the toxic 5.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
So the
toxins are
first 3 steps are to prepare you so that you can, remove them safely.
exactly,
Got it. Okay.
exactly. And so she had mold. It was fortunately only in like her office space in her home. And so they had a mold inspector come in and do a deeper dive, and then did a little bit of remediation. Really didn't cost that much. I think it was like $10,000, fortunately. Did some fogging, did air filter. But that kind of allowed us then to go a little bit deeper with the mold treatment. And she really started to notice a difference. She had a negative cone beam CT, which was really great. Um, and
Wait,
that's
can you just say what was that?
a cone beam CT.
Cone beam of her jaw.
Yeah,
'Cause you're always looking for osteomyelitis.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And so she didn't have any, for people who have a negative cone beam CT, which means a normal one, generally they won't have any root canals. They won't have had any teeth pulled out of their mouth. Because those are the two main reasons why you would potentially have something like that. And fortunately, she didn't have that. There are some times where people have a negative cone beam CT and they have root canals, and we still have to consider to do something about that. But we'll generally, because it's so expensive, we'll wait until the end of step 4 before we choose to do something like that. And so we kind of ramped up on the different tinctures. As we were ramping up on the Borrelia tincture, she started to having a Herxheimer reaction. So we increased step 3 support so that she could tolerate it, and she slowed down her ramp up a little bit, but she was still able to get up to full dose. Held on that, and then moved on to the next tincture. Was able to ramp up on those. Still had die off. Had to keep. I call this the die off dance. Had to keep pivoting back to step 3. She had us in her back pocket. Really, the second 6 months with us is really that time that it takes, that they're going to spend that time in step 4. And I should go back a little bit. Step 2 takes about 2 months. Step 3 takes about 2 months, and step 4 is the rest of the time in the program.
Okay. Yeah.
And so hopefully people can start that around month 4 or 5, and then they're in it for at least 6 to 12 months. It's really, it takes 6 to 12 months to get the toxic 5 out of the body, depending on how well you tolerate the treatment, how clogged up your pathways are. And so we just moved through this process with her. I think she was at like 60% better at 12 months, and then she was at 80% better at 18 months. And at that point, she was like, I feel great. I'm doing really well. I'm just going to keep going. She wasn't having that much Herxheimer reaction at that point in time. We offered her to run some laboratory tests. Do you want to see what's left? And she said, I don't really think so. I don't need to, because I feel so much better. So
Yeah.
that's, you can always do that if you want that intellectual exercise, spend $1,200 and get a couple of lab tests. But yeah, she graduated from the program, did really well. She's talked about coming back for our longevity program, which is like just helping people decrease their risk of heart attack, heart disease, stroke, and Alzheimer's. But
Yeah.
but she's doing well, and we're super happy for her.
And so people work through as a group or as an individual?
Yes, both. So
Okay.
so when they submit an intake form, I provide them with a plan that is individualized to them. And so that's the first thing. And then they have, um, and when I provide them with that plan, it's that plan for the first 6 months. They will meet every single month with a health coach. I have group calls 3 weeks out of the month.
Got it.
So almost every single week they can have face-to-face time with me. And then they have that guaranteed response to any question that they have in our community, so that they can learn from other people's questions, other people can learn from them, and they can have, I mean, you're an expert in this, how important community is for not feeling alone and isolated when you have this condition.
Okay. You can answer this as you wish. I guess, oh, sorry, I've just got a couple last questions. So one is, what would you say differentiates how you've learned to work, what you think really will help people get better? Because a lot of people listening to this might say, well, I worked on my mold, I worked on my Lyme, I did Babesia, like, and I'm still not better. So they might say, maybe this is more of the same. What would you say to them?
I would say there's something missing.
Okay.
And I do offer free calls with people and to see if I can help them. And about a third of the time I say, "You know what? It sounds like you've done everything and I don't have anything else to offer, unfortunately." But, 9 times out of 10, there's something that they're missing. And that's the
Okay.
benefit of going through a program like mine that doesn't test. Is because the herbs that you're going to take are going to address all of the different classes of infection. You're not going to miss anything.
Yeah.
The heavy metals and the chemicals and the molds, like we're going to make sure that you're taking the herbs that you need or the vitamins and minerals, the supplements you need in order to make sure that we're addressing all of those different causes so we leave no stone unturned. Because when you're addressing 99% of the potential causes, you're just going to be successful.
It's kind of like Dr. Dale Bredesen's approach to dementia, right? He talks about the 250 holes in the roof, and unfortunately, you have to patch all of them or you're still going to have a leaking roof.
Right.
Yeah. Can you share anything about the cost? Like, I don't know the cost of your program, but I'm hearing a lot of tinctures and supplements being mentioned, and that must add up as well. Do you have like a ballpark that you let people know this could cost them over, say, the first year?
Yeah, so it's generally gonna be somewhere around 15 to 20,000 US in the first year, you know?
Okay.
And so people just it's everything, that's all in. Yeah, and so that includes program fees, that includes supplements, that includes those labs that I mentioned. So, it's definitely a lot of money, but, I believe that it really is the best chance for people to get better who want to address all of their causes and kinda get to the finish line. So and you don't have to pay all of it at once. Some people pay $1,200 a month, and there's $500 a month for supplements or so. So, you can put together we have everybody join the same 6-month program initially, but then after that, you can downgrade. It can cost less money for longer periods of time once you see the different components of the program. But it's really about, is 15 to $20,000 worth getting your life back, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's how much you'll spend for a really nice vacation, a really nice electronic device, an okay car, right? But none of them give you your life back, right? So it's just and it's really hard. I know in Canada, it's probably even harder because you guys have a public system. It's really hard to
We're
get
not
you
used to
laying
spending money. Yeah.
around spending money, but it's like and investing in ourselves, and are we worth it, right? And so I can tell everybody who's listening to this, you are worth it, and your life is worth it, and as far as I know, this is the only life we get, and so
Right.
make the most of it. Like, you can't take that money with you, like, I want you to be responsible with your money, and I also want you to make an investment that you in your health that maybe you wouldn't make, because of limiting beliefs or something that's not serving you.
What would you say is your success rate? I've gone to your website. You've got lots of very glowing testimonials. You say you have more positive testimonials than any other program. Um, so I'm gonna say, what's your success rate and what would be the thing? Of course, in no program does everyone succeed. So what would be maybe some of the warning signs that you might not be the right fit or the person may not get a full response?
Yeah. So great questions. And so the last time we ran a survey, we found that people who addressed the toxic five went through the program. 87% of them got better.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what does better mean?
Significant improvement. And so generally that was an energy of about an 8 out of 10.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And that's just I'm just hedging my bets because I'm just addressing all these different causes. And so people will generally take about 30 supplements as they go through the program, which some people listening to this may think it's a lot and some people may think it's not a lot. And so
Right.
I try to be a good steward of people's money and give them the biggest bang for the buck. But when you address all of the causes, you're just a lot more likely to get better. And our percentage would probably be better now because that was done before we introduced the nervous system retraining, which on its own oftentimes can, they've done studies on that with the Gupta program and primal trust and whatnot, and those are really significant, 70 to 80% better of people who, go through a process like that. So and, I have a whole assessment process to determine whether somebody's a good fit for me. In
Mm.
our program, you have to be able and willing to work on your mental and emotional health. This is part of the reason why you're not feeling well and what you have to address. You need to have relatively good brain function. People who have bad brain fog cannot follow through any program, let alone ours. Um, and so we want to make sure they've got good enough brain function to follow through a process. Um, we want to make sure that they're going to be successful. So we want to make sure they're going to implement. They're going to follow instructions. They understand that the expectation is this is going to take at least 12 months.
Yeah.
Okay. So I ask them a bunch of questions like that. So if your answer is no to any of those, then we're not a good fit. And
Yeah.
I'll tell them that on the call because I don't want to take anybody's money who I can't get all the way better.
So, Evan, you and I were chatting before we started the recording, and I was sharing, since I've retired from medical practice, I'm kind of pulling back from these, I'll call them, you're using herbals, but I would still call them medical grade interventions because I can't prescribe them or follow them anymore. And I'm really learning so much about what it is in our daily modern lifestyle that is, I would say, significantly contributing to illness. And I'm just wondering how much emphasis you put on those lifestyle factors in addition to all the specific, the 4 steps.
They're very important. And then I just looked at the time. I do have to run in a second.
Perfect.
So they're very important. And so you have to be drinking 3 liters of water a day. I want people to be getting their Goldilocks dose of movement. So this means if you move too much and you feel worse, don't move that much, but do as much as you can. I want to make sure that people are getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. The hours before midnight are even that much more important. And I want to make sure that, and it's more important really what you're not eating than what you are eating, avoiding gluten and dairy and sugar and processed foods and
Yeah.
et cetera. So, yeah, really important part of this process and only one component. So there are people who are very stressed by their food and like can't do a lot of these things. And I say, okay, let's do step 2. Let's try to increase your energy a little bit so that you can, and then they can start to partake and start to modify those lifestyle habits.
Yep, I'm aware of the time. So maybe the last thing before we finish is what's the best way for people to reach you? You've already talked about you work virtually so people can be anywhere in the world. Yes.
Correct. Yeah. So
So
I
how
would
would people
say
reach you?
So I would say if you're interested in doing a fixable fatigue assessment to see if your fatigue is fixable, go to myfatiguescore.com and you can take that assessment and then you'll get a percentage of how fixable it is, and then I'll provide you some guidance. Uh,
Okay.
or you can go directly to my website at energymdmethod.com. You can watch my latest masterclass, get on a free call with me, see if we're a good fit to work together.
Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
I just think it's important to keep moving. Make sure that you're continuing to learn, that you're moving forward, that you're working on your mindset, like incredibly important.
Thank you so much. This was just packed with information. I think people are really, again, it's focusing on a lot of things I don't talk about a lot. So I think people will find it really valuable. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for joining me on the Dr. Eleanor Stein podcast. I hope you are taking away new strategies and ideas to improve your health and a renewed sense of hope. Join me, Dr. Eleanor Stein, for our next episode. Can't wait? Check out my website for a wealth of free resources.